I'll introduce some of the terminology of faceted classification, and we'll be able to see quickly through that terminology to a more general terminology that we've been using to describe information structures. But I think it's also important for you, as you study each of these structures, to think a little bit about the context in which these were created and what the user community for each of these information structures uses, the words that the user communities use in order to understand what's going on. And here in the faceted classification user community, the two words that are really of interest to us is the term facet and the term focus. Of course, faceted classification comes from the idea of a facet. What's a facet? A facet is a quality, it's an attribute. It's some way of describing an item that, that all items will share some instance of. So you can say all items have, let's see, well, it's a difficult question to say what do all items have unless I break down what kind of items am I talking about. And where this came from, of course, was the classification of written materials. You can say, for example, that all items have a place of origin. They all have a source. And so that's one facet. That's one quality. That's one attribute of these printed items, of these things that we want to classify, that we can say they all have one of. They all may have a subject matter, and so we want to use subject matter as a way of classifying them. So a facet is really an attribute or some property of all of the items that we want to classify that they all share, that we can use to differentiate them and, of course, to allow you to find them. Now, I'm hoping you see that there was a sort of a roundabout way of saying a facet's an index. A facet is some set of phrases or terms, and the phrases and terms themselves has a title. It can be a keyword index, it can be an author index, it can be a subject matter index. And the facet is an index from our standpoint. A facet is really just one way of classifying items. And where it gets a little bit complicated is, for example, if you say, well, we saw an example earlier on of a hierarchical index that's also facet. So I don't want to go so far as to say a facet is simply just a flat index, but I do want to say that in terms of our general principles, we can think of each of those facets as another way of indexing the items that we want users to be able to get to. Okay, so that's the first term, a facet. Second term is a focus, or the plural is foci. And those foci are, in our terminology, simply the values of the index, the different enumerations of the index that we then apply to specific items. The facet is, in general, what's the quality that we're indexing, and the focus is a particular specific quality that we're going to apply to certain items. So this terminology of facet and focus, that really maps very, very well to our idea of index and index terms or index values.